The prairie stretched wide beneath the fading sun, a quilt of pale grasses moving like a restless sea. At its heart stood a weather-worn cabin, small against the endless sky, its roof patched with care and stubborn hands. Smoke lifted from its crooked chimney, trailing into the cool September air, carrying the scent of cedar kindling. Inside lived Eliza, a young widow with hands calloused from work and a face softened by sorrow. She moved with quiet precision, mending what could be mended, holding together what wished to fall apart. Her neighbors spoke of her as they might of a storm, distant, untouchable, both feared and pitied. Her husband's boots still waited by the door, cracked leather scuffed from years of wear. She had not moved them, nor the Bible he once read from by the lamplight. She let those remnants sit where they were, as if to anchor herself against the current of emptiness that pulled at her nights. When she went to town, men stared, women whispered. Some urged her to remarry quickly, others spoke of her land as though it were already forfeit. A certain man, Andrew Phelps, appeared too often at her fence line, his smile too certain, his words too shallow. He offered his name, his protection, and hinted at her debt to the town that tolerated her independence. She always declined with politeness that held firm as oak, but a faint unease clung to her each time. He tipped his hat and left. Life was a rhythm of labor and silence until the night the wind carried something different. A storm pressed hard from the west, dragging rain across the plains in sweeping veils. Lightning split the sky, and Eliza, restless, stepped to the window. In the brief flash, she saw a shadow slump against her barn. Fear rippled through her, cold and immediate. She took her husband's rifle, hands trembling, and unlatched the door. The figure lay crumpled in the mud, a trail of blood soaking his shirt. His skin was darker than her own, his hair long, braided, and tangled. An Apache, she thought at once, her heart catching in her throat. Stories told in town returned to her in a rush, raiders who struck fast, left behind only ash and graves. Yet here he was, a man barely clinging to breath, his chest rising in shallow pools. She could have turned away. She could have let the storm claim him. But something deep inside, some stubborn whisper of her own humanity, bent her knees to the earth. She dragged him with all the strength she had, mud streaking her skirts, until he lay inside the cabin by the fire. His eyes flickered open once, dark and sharp even through the haze of pain. She felt the weight of them, not pleading, not accusing, simply watching. She said nothing. She stoked the fire higher, brought water, and began to clean his wounds. The hours stretched long. Thunder cracked overhead. His breathing steadied beneath her care, though fever tugged at him in waves. She caught fragments of words in his tongue, unfamiliar and low. By dawn, he slept heavily, a body still, but not surrendered. Eliza leaned against the hearth, exhaustion pressing down, and wondered what judgment she had invited upon herself. In the days that followed, she kept him alive. She changed his bandages, fed him broth, left water within reach. At first he ate nothing, but then a slow acceptance showed itself. He drank, he chewed, he watched her with guarded eyes. He spoke no English, or chose not to. Their exchanges were silent, yet heavy with meaning. The lift of a brow, the set of a jaw, the pause of her hand before offering bread. It did not take long for the town to notice. A horseman passing near her land saw movement in the window, and word spread like a spark on dry grass. The sheriff arrived with two others, Andrew among them. Their boots struck hard against her porch as they demanded to be let inside. Eliza stood tall, though fear churned low in her stomach. They found him at once, the Apache, weak but upright, sitting on the edge of a bed. The room thickened with tension. Guns lifted, curses spat. Eliza placed herself between them, voice steady, though her pulse thundered in her throat. She said he was wounded, that she had saved him, that no man would be dragged from her cabin like a beast. They laughed bitterly, spat words like traitor, accused her of harboring the enemy. Andrew's voice carried above the rest. He said the widow had shamed herself and her town, that such scandal would not be tolerated. If she would not cast the Apache out, there was only one path left to make things right. Marriage, he declared, binding them not as fugitive and savior, but as man and wife. Let her bear the burden she had chosen. Let her carry it openly. Eliza's face burned. She looked at the sheriff, at the other men, searching for mercy, but found none. Their minds were settled. And so, with no priest, no vows of love, no joy, the union was forced. It was a ceremony in name only, spoken quickly, heavy with mockery. Her hand was placed against the Apache's, his name given as Tan, though he spoke no agreement, only watched with a silence that cut sharper than any blade. When it was done, the men left, satisfied they had bound disgrace with disgrace. That night the cabin was unbearably quiet. Eliza sat at the table, her fingers knotted together, staring at the lamplight. Tan sat across the room, still unreadable. She felt anger rise, but not toward him. Toward the world that had cornered her, toward men who decided her life without her say. Yet as the hours passed, she glanced at him and found not threat, not cruelty, only patience. He made no move toward her, no claim, no demand. In the days after, a strange rhythm began. He rose before dawn, stepping outside with careful strength, returning with firewood stacked high against the wall. He repaired her broken fence post, mended the hinge of her barn door, his hands steady and sure. He spoke little, but his actions spoke more than words might. When she dropped a pail, he lifted it. When the wind tore at her shawl, he tied it back in place. Each gesture was simple, but lodged itself inside her like a seed waiting for spring. Eliza felt herself softening against her will. At night, she still thought of her husband, still felt the ache of his absence. But when she looked across the fire and saw Tan's profile cut against the glow, she no longer saw an enemy. She saw a man scarred by survival, carrying a silence as heavy as her own. One evening, as the sky dimmed into violet, she set 2 bowls on the table instead of one. They ate in silence, yet it felt less lonely than it ever had before. When she rose to clear the dishes, their hands brushed. She pulled back quickly, but the touch lingered, a warmth she could not name. Outside, the prairie wind sang through the grass, carrying whispers only hearts could hear. Inside, in the small cabin stitched together with grief and stubbornness, 2 shadows leaned closer on the wall, though neither dared to cross the space between them. And though she did not yet know it, the whisper of something new had begun to take root. The days slipped one into the other like beads on a frayed string. The prairie changed its colors, gold to gray, and the cabin carried the rhythm of 2 lives learning to bend without breaking. Eliza woke to the sound of axes striking wood, the steady measure of Tan's work outside. He did not ask permission. He simply shouldered the labor her arms had borne alone for too long. When she set bread on the table, he took it with a nod, never greedily, never demanding. It unsettled her at first, this quiet presence that neither intruded nor retreated, but soon it began to settle her instead. She began to listen to the silences between them. They were no longer filled with suspicion, but with something gentler, like the hush that lingers after a hymn. When he mended her roof, she held the ladder, their eyes meeting above her head in brief, wordless recognition. When she stitched his torn shirt by the fire, his gaze lingered on her hands, not in ownership, but in gratitude. Each small moment drew a line of connection, faint and trembling, yet undeniable. But the world outside her cabin did not forget. Whispers grew louder in town, sharpened by Andrew Phelps's tongue. He told anyone who would listen that Eliza had betrayed her people, that she sheltered the very blood that had spilled from white men's veins. He said she was blind, or worse, that she had chosen to shame herself with a savage. His voice carried weight, for men like him always found a crowd willing to listen. Eliza heard fragments when she went to trade. Women turned their faces from her. Men spat into the dust when she passed. She bore it as she always had, chin raised, back straight, but inside she felt the sting. Each word was a stone hurled at the fragile thing she and Tan were building. One night, as wind rattled the cabin walls, she asked him softly why he had come north, why he had been near her barn that storm-struck night. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, in halting English, he told her his village was gone, burned in the endless skirmishes between soldiers and his people. He had been fleeing when bullets found him. He did not expect to survive, but the storm had carried him to her door. His words were simple, but behind them she heard a grief that mirrored her own. Loss had carved them both hollow, yet within that emptiness something new was beginning to echo. The turning came with fire. A dry spell gripped the plains, and lightning split the sky one evening, striking the grass beyond her field. Flames rose quick and merciless, racing with the wind. Eliza ran with buckets, her skirts heavy with smoke, her lungs seared with heat. Tan was beside her, his body moving with fierce strength, though still not fully healed. Together they beat at the fire with wet sacks, doused sparks at the edge of the cabin, fought until sweat and soot blurred their sight. At last the fire passed, leaving the air thick and the earth blackened. They collapsed near the fence, breathless, the cabin still standing behind them. In that moment, with the smell of smoke clinging to them, Eliza felt the dam of her restraint break. She turned to him, voice trembling, and told him he was no burden, no shame. She said that without him, she would have lost everything. For the first time, his face softened into something near a smile. His hand found hers in the ash, strong and steady, and she did not pull away. That night, their silence was different. It was no longer a wall, but a shelter. But Andrew would not let the bond remain. He arrived days later with 3 men, their horses restless, their eyes full of judgment. They called Tayan out, demanding he be taken away, saying justice could not be mocked any longer. Andrew's words dripped with scorn as he told Eliza to step aside, to leave her so-called husband to his fate. She stood on her porch, rifle in hand, her body trembling, yet unmovable. She said he was her husband, that the vows they mocked had bound her in truth more than in shame. Her voice rose, fierce and unshaken, as she told them the cabin was hers, the life within it hers, and no man would rip it apart. The men faltered, uncertain before her fire. Tayan stood beside her, silent, not raising a weapon, only standing with the gravity of a mountain. That silence unsettled them more than any threat. Andrew sneered, spat in the dust, and turned his horse, muttering of foolish women and wasted land. The others followed, the sound of hooves fading into distance. When the dust settled, Eliza lowered the rifle, her hands still shaking. She looked at Tayan, and in his gaze she saw not the shadow of an enemy, nor the weight of pity, but something steady and real. It was not sudden love, not the wild blaze the song spoke of, but a slow burning ember that promised warmth if tended. At dawn they sat together outside the cabin. The prairie stretched before them, scarred with blackened patches, yet glimmering gold where the sun touched it. Her hand brushed against his, and this time she did not pull away. The wind carried the scent of ash and wildflowers alike, as if to remind them that ruin and renewal often walk side by side. The cabin behind them no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a beginning. And though the world would still whisper, here, in the quiet between them, another kind of whisper had grown stronger, one that carried the weight of home. If this tale touched your heart, stay by the fire with us. Subscribe for more Wild West stories of love, loss, and home.